Our Neighbors Nanny, a story by E.B.'s Hart. The voice of Pastor Timothy, the general overseer of Radical Christians Ministry, could be heard vibrating on the loudspeaker, as he prayed for the newlywed. You shall prosper, your marriage shall be referenced as God's institution by the unbelievers. And everyone chorused Amen. Andrew and his wife Elizabeth, Lizzie as she was fondly called, drove to their new home in the heart of the city. I am the new pastor posted to Radical Christian Ministry located in this estate. Andrew introduced himself to the estate security. Welcome, sir, the security man said, smiling. I hope this one will not die like the others, the security man said to his fellow security officer. I hope so too, because I still remember vividly how the former pastor of that church was found hanging in his bathroom. The second security man chipped in. That was horrible, and I heard that was not the first time the pastors had taken their own lives. Imagine killing your entire family first, before killing yourself. The security man added and shook his head. Things are happening. Pastor Andrew was a fresh graduate from the School of Pastors. He was the youngest pastor to head the Radical Christians Ministry, Hillview Estate branch. The church had a property within the estate, where their pastors reside. But over the years, about 3 pastors had died mysteriously with their families, while the rest either go insane or fall out of grace, while in the course of their pastoring mission. No pastor leaves the estate the same. They either die or become unstable for life. While some persons dismissed it as natural, others believed it was odd since the last one was murder-suicide situation. Welcome to our estate, the estate caretaker said, shaking Pastor Andrew. Here we live like one large family, we look out for each other, so feel free to relate your worries if you have any in the future. He concluded and left. Their closest neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Peters, also came to welcome them. We were very close to the previous occupants, Pastor and Mrs. Ocone, before their demise, Mrs. Peters said and shook her head sadly. I believe we will get along with you people as well. You all seem lovely, she said, and they all shook hands. Lizzie was in high spirit. This is your first parish as a pastor, my love, and I want us to make the most of it, she said to Andrew, her husband, smiling. They both knelt down and prayed before retiring to bed. However, 2 months later, Lizzie woke up around few minutes past midnight to pray. She decided to pray alone first and wake her husband up later. In the process of praying, her eyes flashed through their window. She saw Mrs. Peters' nanny, a lady in her late 30s, standing close to their swimming pool. What is this lady doing outside this late? She said quietly. She was about to turn away, when her eyes captured something really odd. She saw the nanny kneeling down in front of the pool and bending towards the water as if she wanted to drink from it. Her curiosity arose when the nanny remained in the same positing for almost 1 minute. What is this lady doing? But her thought was interrupted when she saw the nanny change into a very strange animal that looked more like a big fish and went into the pool. My God! She screamed in a loud voice. Honey, what is it? Pastor Andrew jumped out of the bed and asked while holding Lizzie, who was livid with shock. Talk to me, dear, what happened? Andrew kept asking. But when he saw that his wife was too scared to reply, he started praying. He prayed until daybreak. He then laid Lizzie on the bed and she slept off. She was woken up hours later, still shaken but stable. You scared me earlier, what happened? Pastor Andrew asked while handing her a cup of hot tea. I saw a very strange thing when I was praying earlier. Lizzie narrated what she saw earlier to her husband, shaking with fear. Andrew laughed it off and discouraged her from thinking about it. Please don't say this in front of people, so they won't start seeing you as a crazy person. We are both exposed to know things like that can be seen as a sign of mental illness. And you know our minds can play tricks on us sometimes. After a long conversation with Andrew, Lizzie believed she may not have seen anything. 2 days later, Lizzie and Andrew, who just returned from Sunday service, heard a knock on their door. This is for you, Ma, Mrs. Peters' nanny said, handing a bowl of fried rice with assorted meat to Lizzie. Oh, all this for us? Lizzie asked, smiling. Yes, my auntie said I should give you people as her Sunday gift, the nanny said, smiling. When she left, Lizzie kept the food in the kitchen and called Andrew. "Let's start eating. What are you waiting for?" Andrew asked while bringing plate and spoons. "We are not eating it," Lizzie said, frowning. "Why?" Andrew asked, sounding annoyed. "Because I don't take food or any edible from people I barely know." Lizzie was talking while wrapping the food up to the bin. "No, this is not right. How can you do this? Are you now saying the Peters are strangers or what?" Andrew fumed. "Relax, honey. I know what I am doing. Something is not right with the Peters. We need to pray to find out more," Lizzie said soothingly. 1 week later, Lizzie, who had started 21 days midnight prayers, was praying at midnight as usual when she saw Mrs. Peters' nanny again. She quickly ran to her husband. "Honey, wake up and see this for yourself." Andrew got up reluctantly and sat close to the window with his wife. The nanny stood in a place for almost 10 minutes. "What is this, Lizzie? She is probably getting some fresh air. Do you know it is an offense to spy on someone? Why are you so obsessed with this lady?" Pastor Andrew was still talking when Lizzie shook him. "Look." What they both saw froze them at a spot. The nanny removed her head and started washing it at the pool. After washing, she plaited her hair and fixed it back. Then turned and looked straight at the pastor and his wife. They couldn't look away, because they were scared stiff. Then she screamed and a very scary shrieking sound deafened their ear. Andrew fell on the ground unconscious, but Lizzie was fine. She started praying for her husband, who woke up a day later. "We have to tell everyone. As a man of God, it is my duty to save this estate. This can't be happening. How can this lady be living in this estate, cooking food, and be giving to almost everyone here?" Andrew said once he regained his strength. "You are right. We have to start by informing Mrs. Peters. She has been nice to us, and she does not deserve this kind of monster to be raising her kids for her." Lizzie went to the bank where Mrs. Peters works, called her outside and narrated all that she had been witnessing to her. Mrs. Peters thanked her and she left. However, Lizzie was so surprised to see police officers the next at her home. "You are under arrest for defamation." "What?" Lizzie screamed in shock. The news of how the new pastor's wife defames people by labeling them a witch soon circulated the entire estate. Everyone blamed and cursed at her. "Instead of you to concentrate in making babies for your husband, you are busy trying to destroy people's name," one of their neighbors said to Lizzie while pouring a dirty water on her. Everyone gradually started bullying Lizzie and Andrew, to the extent that their church members wrote to their church headquarters to transfer Pastor Andrew to another parish. All Lizzie's effort to explain herself to Mrs. Peters and apologize failed. "You think you can win this fight?" Lizzie startled at the sight of the nanny. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. This is just the beginning of your woes in this estate. This estate is my home and its occupants are my subjects. I will give you one free advice: fall in line or perish. If I ever see or feel you praying again, you and your miserable pastor husband will die like the previous occupants of your house." Lizzie could not believe her ears, as she listened to what was coming out Agnes' mouth, Mrs. Peters' nanny. It then dawned on her that they were up against a supernatural being. Lizzie started observing something very strange. Everyone in the estate, both young and old, refereed to Agnes as Mama. They all bowed to greet her, even her employer. This explained why everyone attacked her. They were obviously under her control. Liz's mother, who was a deaconess, came to visit them because of the rumor she heard. "Everyone is saying you are causing trouble in this peaceful estate. Lizzie, what is the problem?" Liz's mother asked, frowning. By the time Lizzie finished telling her mother what they were up against, she was already sitting at the edge of her seat. "Pack your things and leave here with me this minute. Where is Andrew?" Liz's mother was so scared. "Mom, hold on, we will leave with you, but tomorrow, can't you see it is already late?" Lizzie pleaded with her mother. When it was midnight, Lizzie, who had never stopped praying, got up and prayed. She begged her husband to join her, but he was too tired. After a while, they heard a knock on their door. Lizzie ignored it. Andrew got up from bed and insisted on going to check. Lizzie begged him to ignore it, but he refused. Andrew opened the door and saw no one. He went outside and checked around the house. After a while, Andrew came and laid down beside Lizzie. Lizzie discovered that Andrew was unusually so cold. "Are you okay?" she asked. Andrew simply laid down and slept off. When it was daybreak, Lizzie and her mother prepared breakfast and were getting ready to leave the estate for a while, as Lizzie's mother had suggested. Lizzie went to wake her husband, who had not woken up unlike him. "Honey, get up, breakfast is ready," Lizzie tapped Andrew. She then took their bags to the car, but what she saw outside made her to scream her lungs out. She saw Andrew hanging on a rope dead. How is this even possible? She just left Andrew on the bed now. Her scream made her mother and neighbors to gather around. "What is this? How did Andrew end up here?" her mother asked. Lizzie quickly ran inside to check on her husband, but saw no one on the bed again. She cried so hard. "They all end up killing themselves," was the first statement Lizzie heard from her neighbors. Lizzie ran over to Mrs. Peters' house and started shouting for her nanny Agnes. "You have killed my husband, what did we ever do to you?" She started praying with tears and screams, but was interrupted by the estate security men, who bundled her out of the estate. When all these commotions were going on, Liz's mother, who was so distraught seeing her only child in pains, went into Mrs. Peters' house. She asked her children where their nanny's room was, and they showed her. She went into the room, took some of the nanny's personal belongings and left. Andrew was buried, and somehow, Liz's neighbors accused Lizzie of killing him. They went as far as agreeing to testify in court as eyewitnesses. A distraught Lizzie was detained as a suspect in her dear husband's murder. Liz's mother took Agnes's personal belonging and went to the mountain to pray at midnight. She called her name while holding her cloths, then called on God to fight. Agnes as usual changed into a fish and went into the pool just about the same time Liz's mother was praying in the mountain. Her power was from the pool, because she cooks with the water from the pool and gave to any occupant of the estate, thereby tying their soul. When Agnes was done swimming, she couldn't change back to human being again. She struggled to stay on the ground, but it was hard. Because as a fish she needed to be in the water. When Mrs. Peters and her family woke up in the morning, they looked for their nanny, but she was nowhere to be found. "Mommy, look. There is a big fish in our pool," Mrs. Peters' son shouted from his room. Few minutes later, the whole estate gathered to look at the big fish whose face was Agnes's face. The authorities were called, because the fish kept getting bigger and bigger. By the time the authorities got to the estate, the fish was already bigger than the pool and everyone had to run for their lives. The police had to shoot the fish dead, as it became a threat to the people around. Mrs. Peters started crying on remembering how Agnes had been beating her and her children. Everyone in the estate started telling their own story, of how Agnes would send them on errand and they dared not refuse. Agnes was sleeping with all their husbands, she decides what happened in their homes. And if you dare ask questions, she would beat you. They all attested to one thing. They all collected food from her immediately they moved into the estate. The question that was on everyone's lips was, how did employ her? They all asked Mrs. Peters. She knocked on my door, claiming to come from an agency I asked to find me a nanny. All I remember was telling her to wait for me to confirm from the agency, and the rest was history. Mrs. Peters said in tears. They all sought the release of Lizzie and apologized to her. The estate became liberated and everyone was happy. But what Mrs. Peters did not know was that her children were already initiated into the water kingdom by Agnes. Few months later, Mrs. Peters' daughter woke up at midnight to swim as a fish in their pool.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.